What we know is that there are lots of tools, and different tools or combinations work for different people in different situations. And that's what we see the data bearing out. It's the people who are using multiple tools, not one thing, multiple. They're getting out, they're talking to their chatter advisors, they're traveling in time in a healthy way, they're activating, they're exercising. It's not one, it's many. The more healthy things you do, the better people seem to be feeling. So it really reinforces this idea that it's all about having a good toolbox. That is where the answer is, not just doing one thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Kross. I'm the author of Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. I'm also a professor at the University of Michigan and the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. We're all familiar with at some level, but it's also a mysterious one. The idea that we talk to ourselves at times. And one of the points I'm going to hope to try to convince you of is that these conversations that we have with ourselves are pretty important. In fact, they're some of the most important conversations that we have in our life.
3, 2, 1.
So we're here to talk about talking to ourselves, how to understand, decipher, and even apply on our own terms the voice or voices in our head. And what I love most about your work, Dr. Kross, was just kind of helping me grasp what I and so many other people, I'm sure, go through on a daily basis. And that's whether that's internally, externally, we're talking to ourselves. We're trying to walk through things, talk through things. Sometimes, talk ourselves off of a ledge or just try to process something that doesn't seem real. So I guess I got to ask, where did the inspiration come for this content and this work?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. So the inspiration for this work, it really came from an experience I had in college. Basically, what happened was, if we go back even before college to set this up, the origin story. When I was a kid, my dad used to emphasize how valuable it can be to introspect, to turn your attention inward, and essentially work through your problems with language, to talk yourself through things. And that was a tool that he impressed upon me from a young age. It's a tool I used throughout my childhood and adolescence. And it's a tool that worked out pretty well for me. I get into arguments. I focus my attention inward, kind of come up with a solution. Here's why this happened. I move on. I'd ask, a girl out on a date. She'd say no. Why'd that happen? Move on. I never really got stuck. And then I got to college and I took my first psychology class. And what I learned in that class was, on the one hand, this ability that we possess to turn our attention inward and use language to work through our problems, this serves many people well. But, and this was a big but for me, that same capacity also gets people in trouble a lot of the time. We encounter curveballs and we try to work through them, but we end up ruminating and worrying and catastrophizing and getting stuck in these negative thought loops, which I call chatter, instead. And so that was a giant puzzle for me. On the one hand, we have this remarkable tool, this ability to use language to solve problems, innovate, create. But this tool often gets us in deep trouble. And why is that? And when it gets us in trouble, what can we do to right the ship? I ended up going to graduate school to figure out how to use science to answer those questions.
Not a bad place to go, in pursuit of life's greatest questions. And what you're talking about there reminded me of kind of this first big block that stood out to me. I'm going to be that guy that's going to quote you back your own work, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
You said here right in the beginning, while memory lane can lead us down chatter lane, there's nothing inherently harmful about returning to the past or imagining the future. The ability to engage in mental time travel is an exceedingly valuable feature of the human mind. You go on to elaborate a little bit more there, but what stood out to me was mental time travel. And I believe that's what you're kind of hinting at about the human ability to do just that. It's more than just talking in our head or talking out loud or thinking in a voice that we can process. It's the ability to kind of go from the here and the now to the future, to the past, to all the above. Can you help us understand that concept a little bit more? It's more than just talking to ourselves, but like you say, mental time travel.
Yeah, the ability to travel in time in our mind, to reflect on the past or, anticipate the future, the ability to savor past experiences, learn from our mistakes, fantasize about what might happen next or plan for it. These are remarkable attributes that distinguish us from all other species, our ability to travel in time in our mind in that way. And I think it's sometimes easy to lose sight of just how valuable those attributes are because in modern days, and I'm sure you've heard this before, we often hear this idea that our focus should be on not going into the past or the future, but instead remaining fixated on the present. Like be in the moment, right? I can't tell you how often I'm told just be in the moment. I've got nothing against being in the moment at times, but I don't think we would want human beings to always be in the moment. Like there are certain low animals that are lower than us on the evolutionary chain. They're always in the moment, responding in a very reflexive way to what's happening around them.
Reacting, surviving by
just
the only choice
stimulus response. Exactly. Like this ability to travel in time in our mind. I mean, I just got back from a family vacation a couple of weeks ago. I'm constantly savoring those memories. They bring me enormous joy. I've got a few like big presentations coming up. I'm beginning to plan for them. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do differently from previous engagements and how I'm going to, make sure that this is a success. I'm constantly traveling in time in my mind, I think to my betterment, both professionally, but also subjectively as a human. It gives my life real richness. What is problematic about mental time travel for us some of the time, though, is sometimes this mental time travel machine that we possess, it breaks down. We go into the past to learn from our mistakes, but we get stuck there. We just keep on harping over what happened to us. We start ruminating about it, or we start fixating on one thing about the future that we're really worried about, and we get stuck there. And that's really the territory that a lot of my research and my book deals with. When we get stuck in the past, just looping over the past. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. I feel terrible. What am I going to do? Why did it happen? Just turn that over in your mind or the future. What can we do to free us up to travel more fluidly in our mind and, free up the mental machinery that we have to solve our problems? We've got tools to do that, to help us not get stuck. And we're not always taught what those tools are, by our parents or in school. And so, one of the drives to write Chatter was to share these tools with people who might not have known about them beforehand.
Well, before we dive into the tools and to better understand and use this Chatter, I want to ask a question actually right about what you were just talking about. When we're ruminating on the past or thinking about the future, and like you were saying, we often get stuck. We're spinning our wheels, we're catastrophizing, maybe even imagining, too much pie in the sky kind of stuff. Either way, we get stuck.
None of which you ever do.
Never,
sure,
not
right?
even once. And I don't even understand what we're talking about because I can't relate. I'm curious, in your research and your professional experience, how much of that is of our own choice and how much of it is actually the brain? To really, I guess, fine tune that question is, maybe when we're ruminating on something in the past and we're stuck, we're down in the dumps, we're feeling some kind of way, we just can't get over that quote negative, terrible, awful, no good, bad thing here. How much of that is like our brain realizing and maybe even reliving or thinking we're re-experiencing it versus us just kind of choosing to stay stuck, if that makes sense? I guess, is biology working against us or not?
Well, here's one way to think about it. It's a great question. So we've got a tool that serves us really well 90% of the time, 95% of the time, this ability to turn our attention inward to solve problems, to learn about the past. Why did we screw up? How can we do better? To anticipate the future. But 5 or 10% of the time, and I'm just throwing those numbers out there, I'm not quoting an actual paper, but just for example's sake, some of the time that tool, we try to use it, but we're not using it optimally. It's not work. It's jamming up on us. And the question is like, why is it jamming up on us? And when that happens, what should we do? Should we throw the tool out altogether, or should we try to fix it? I'm of the belief that there are many different tools that we possess that can allow us to fix that tool when it's not working well. So when you ask me the question, are we choosing to do this versus is this just happening? I think for many people, it's just happening in the sense that they fall down a path that is not productive. I think the majority of people, don't wake up and think, I want to ruminate a lot today about this problem and just get
I would
stuck in
agree.
ways that make me
I would
feel
hope
miserable.
not. Yeah.
Yes, but now I should say now there are cases in which people do like to they think that wallowing in things over and over is going to make them feel better when in fact it doesn't. And so that's a different scenario. In each case, though, you could use the tools that I write about to right the ship, to break people out of that funk. Um, if people feel responsible though for ruminating or worrying or experiencing chatter, um, my advice is like don't beat yourself up about this. Like if you experience chatter at a time, like congratulations, welcome to the human condition. Most people do at some point or another. And what is
Congratulations,
really
you're not special. Really. Yeah, we all go
exactly
through it.
we all experience these things at times, and the trick is to shorten the amount of time that we spend in that space. And there are lots of things that you could do to do exactly that.
If we could keep on this angle of, the negative, the non-favorable, the failures, the losses, the trauma, rumination on this. First and foremost, I love your point and I agree. Actually, welcome to the human experience. You're not special. Unfortunately, humans do go through pain and suffering quite often, but congratulations that you get to experience it. You get to process it. You get to choose to kind of go back and find meaning in. That's exactly what I'm all about here at Everforward Radio. But you bring up a point that really caught me off guard about when we go from maybe ruminating on a unpleasant thought or memory or experience to, well, let me get this out. Let me share it with others. And it kind of threw me off because you're actually saying that this might not be as conducive as one might think. You're saying here that these findings, along with many others, clashes dramatically with conventional wisdom. Talking, we are often told by popular culture, makes you feel better. Talking about your problems, airing it out, trying to connect with somebody. Much self-help literature tells us this, as do many of the people around us. We hear that venting our emotions is healthy and supporting others is indispensable. It's not that simple, you say, though there are reasons it might seem that it is. Can you expand on that for us, please? Because that really caught me off guard.
I'm happy to. And this is like one giant myth I tried to blow up in this book with science. Other people, let's be clear, can be a remarkable tool when it comes to experiencing chatter. Like other people are in a prime position to help us. If you think about the role that other people play in our lives when it comes to regulating our emotions, they're actually the first tool that we ever encounter. Like what happens when a baby is born? They are soothed by other people, skin to skin contact. And then throughout people's lives, when they age and develop, it is typically, assuming they're in a supportive household, it's other people who are giving them advice, who are teaching them about how to navigate the curveballs of life. Like I told this, I mentioned my dad earlier and what he taught me. That's him giving me tools to help me manage things. So other people are in a prime position to help. However, they're also in a position to harm us when it comes to our chatter if they talk to us in the wrong way. And sometimes the messaging that we get from popular culture isn't optimal in this regard. And what I mean by that is this. Many people have heard, and I'm guessing this is true for you, Chase, since you brought this up, catching you off guard, that we're taught, hey, when something bad is happening to us, just find someone to, don't keep it inside, get it out, express your emotions to someone. This is actually an ancient idea. It goes all the way back to Aristotle and Freud. And, in contemporary culture, it's all over the place, right? Don't keep it in, let it out. there's been a lot of research on the consequences of venting. And here's what we know. Venting can be really good for maintaining the friendship and relational bonds between two people. Like it feels good to know that there are people I could turn to who are willing to just hear me out. They've got my back. They're waiting to let me talk about my emotions.
Trust, support, love.
Yeah,
I'm not alone.
fantastic. Not alone. All those wonderful social bonds are strengthened from venting. Here's the catch, though. If all you do in a conversation about your chatter is vent about it to someone else, the research shows that you leave those conversations and you're often just as upset, if not more upset, than when you started talking. Because all you've done in the conversation is just rehearse all of the crappiness that you've experienced. Oh my God, this happened. Then I felt this way and it's terrible. So you're just rehearsing what you felt and what happened to you.
Reliving it.
Reliving it,
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And that doesn't actually turn the temperature down on our chatter responses. If anything, it turns it up. So what is the solution? The solution is not, I repeat, not to talk about your experiences at all. You do want to share what you're going through with someone else to a certain degree. But ideally, at some point in the conversation, the person you're talking to, they start nudging you to look at the bigger picture. They start trying to help and work with you to try to think through the problems you're dealing with. And it can take lots of forms. Maybe it's
hopefully if they're a good friend, they're doing that. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, hey, so how do you think you could deal with this? Or, well, let's put this in perspective. You know, you've gotten rejected before, or here's how I've dealt with this. And so that is really what I call the art of being a good advisor to someone else when it comes to chatter. It's initially taking the time to listen, but then at a certain point in the conversation, transitioning into this kind of helping the person get perspective mode. And you know, not all of the people who we love and love us are good at that. You know, I think there are a handful of people that in my life that are really skilled at doing this for me. And I turn to them regularly. But there are other people that I'm really close to. I never talk to them about my chatter because I know they want to help me, but the way they think they can help me is by just getting me to relive the feelings, and that doesn't in the long run do a lot of good. So my advice is to think really carefully about who in your life makes for a good chatter advisor. Like, who are those people in your network? Those are the people you should consult. And then on the flip side, when people come to you with some chatter, you now have a playbook for how to help them. You don't just have to kind of stumble along, but there are actually concrete things you could do in conversations to assist.
And that is a really interesting explanation. Thank you for that. It makes me kind of wonder about how much does the aspect of ego play into that? And are we really maximizing our potential for understanding our chatter, or are we really just allowing another place for ego to kind of thrive? And here's what I mean by that. If we have this chatter advisor, like you were saying, odds are that's someone that we're there to vent to, which is really another platform or a great playground for ego. It's like, hey, tell me that I'm not crazy, you know, justify this, you know, I can't believe she did this to me, or I had this experience, but, you know, barring any horrific, you know, tragedy or death or something like that, unless it's the person who actually you feel in the wrong by, I'm wondering if this is really just opening up a bigger container for ego to play. Imagine if you were doing this chatter advisor with the person that you were ruminating about, then you're actually opening up, but then getting close to problem solving and not just looking for justification. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, I think so. I mean, so here's you tell me if I got it right. I think so. One of the reasons why other people can often be so incredibly helpful when it comes to our chatter is they have some distance and objectivity when it comes to the situation.
Which is another huge aspect you wrote about that I really agree with.
Yeah. So like they're not involved. They could weigh in soundly. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that they're always, you know, providing you with lovey-dovey support and, you know, here, have a muffin and a cup of warm tea and everything will be okay.
Which sounds great.
Yeah, it does sound great, especially East Coast time right now. I'm ready for some of that. But, you know, emotional comfort and support is useful, but we also need to get accurate feedback sometimes. And, whether that's of a tough love variety or pointing out some of our own missteps on in a compassionate way. If the person's not in this situation, they are uniquely equipped to do that. Now, if you're talking to the person who you're in an altercation with, someone who's causing the chatter, that makes things a little bit messier because they themselves are not removed from the situation. So I think there you do have ego and defensiveness that you have to deal with. Now, there are, of course, there can be real value in having a direct conversation with someone you're having a problem with for other reasons to repair the relationship. But I think talking to people who are not involved is a separate category of help that can be really helpful.
The distance aspect, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was something that really hit home for me. And it's beneficial when we're having our chatter advisor. They've got the distance. They're probably maybe not directly involved, so they can be there. They can provide input because they have that distance and hopefully objectivity. But one way that you share, or some examples you share, on how we can get distance with our own self to properly navigate the chatter, is to think and talk to ourselves in kind of like the third person, or to call us by our name, basically.
Yeah.
Can you expand on this concept? It was so fascinating.
Yeah, this is one of my primary personal strategies, go-to for chatter. We call it distance self-talk. It's a remarkably efficient tool for gaining some distance on our problems. And what it involves, quite simply, is using your name or the second person pronoun you to coach yourself through a problem. All right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation? It sounds silly. I should add, we do this. We encourage people to do this silently, not when they're like walking down the street.
I do this all the time. I'm like, Chase, you idiot! I can't.
That's well. There you go.
More positive self-talk,
Yeah, but even the tough stuff can sometimes be useful. Like, get your act together. What are you doing here? Yeah. So turns out. Well, first, let me tell you how this works. So many people, I'm guessing this is true of you, but tell me if it's not, have had the experience of a friend or a loved one coming to them with a problem. They're ruminating about, they're worried. It's not happening to you. You can easily coach them through the situation. Fair enough?
Usually, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So we know that when the problem's not happening to us, we can be better advisors to other people. And so the question is, are there ways of thinking about our own circumstances like they were happening to someone else? Right? That's one way of creating distance. And there are lots of ways that you can do that, but it turns out language provides us with a really efficient and powerful way of doing that. Because think about, when do you use the second person pronoun you or a name? Most of the time we use those parts of speech, we use them when we're thinking about or referencing other people. So the links in your mind between you and others, super tight link. And so this is almost like a psychological jujitsu move. When you use your own name to think through your problems, it's almost like you're talking to another person, right? You're advising someone else, and that gives us the distance, makes it much easier to work through our problems soundly. We've done neuroscience research which shows that different networks in the brain light up when you're using your name versus I. And
it's really, you're thinking about this. The brain is thinking, am I in self-talk or am I talking about somebody else? So you're actually forcing yourself biochemically, physiologically to operate differently.
That's right.
It's fascinating.
That's right. It's like turning a switch in the mind, and you're like putting yourself in this mode of talking to others, weighing in on someone else's problems rather than my own. And we just lack the objectivity often to weigh in on our own problems. What I love about some of this work is that you actually can see examples of people doing this spontaneously to regulate their emotions throughout history. So I tell a couple of stories in the book about Julius Caesar, Henry Adams, LeBron James, if you've ever heard of him, Jennifer Lawrence, the actress. There's actually Jeff Bridges, that was an Iron Man. I saw
that clip recently you shared on your Instagram.
I mean, how powerful is that clip?
I mean,
it's remarkable.
I'm always intrigued by anything the dude has to say.
Well, you should go, if you're listening, go check out. It's on my Instagram. What do we call that? Instagram feed wall?
Yeah, it was a reel, I think you put up. Yeah,
it's a reel. It's also up there as a post. basically, you've got Jeff Bridges was the villain in Iron Man, and he's telling the story about how he was really stressed out, full of chatter when they first started shooting because he didn't have a script, and he needs a script to perform.
Yeah, and he said it was like his first big, major, big blockbuster, big budget, everything. You know, he was used to smaller scale stuff.
Yeah, like so he was really, really nervous. And then he goes, and then I did one thing and it flipped a switch and it made it. And I said to myself, Jeff, what are you worried about? I used my own name. And so he just describes this very well. And I assure you, he is not on the Chatter payroll by any means. Our budget isn't that big. So there are actually instances of people spontaneously doing this. You said you've done this too in your life. And if I had to sum up what I think the real value of this work is and why I chose to write Chatter, it is this. There are lots of different tools out there for managing our minds, managing our chatter. A lot of complex science went into the identification of those tools. By the end of the day, a lot of these things are really simple to do. Some of them may be familiar, others not. But knowing about what these tools are, like once you know them, it gives you the opportunity to be deliberate. So you don't have to wait until you stumble on using your name to work yourself through a problem. You can do it the moment you begin to smell the chatter brewing. And as a result, shorten the period that you get locked into that state. So that's where I think the real, I hope the contribution is.
Yeah, it's all a matter of awareness. You know, all the things that I think add the most value to my life or some of the biggest game changers happen when there's not even anything that monumental that changes, but it's just that split second level of awareness of when I can catch it when it's beginning so that I can take the reins rather than it.
I mean, you summed it up perfectly. And I think there is enormous value there. I think that all of these tools, they're just hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to use them. We just need to know where they are and what to do. And you don't have to take a 12-week, course to figure that out. As we just described, one of those tools, distant self-talk, use your name to coach yourself through a problem. Self-control, emotion control, it doesn't have to be difficult. We often think it's really hard, but in fact, it can be really easy.
All right, now I've got a unique question for you next.
Yeah.
I've heard some people, I'm going to call them crazy, when they're having chatter, when they're talking, thinking in their head, there's no voice. For me personally, when I'm talking to myself, thinking internally, when my chatter is happening, it's me, it's my voice. I had this internal voice. It's like there's no actual sound, but I hear myself talking. But I've met some people, which are crazy to me, that there is no voice, and I don't understand that. In your experience in studying and understanding chatter, is there a difference there? Do people say that, chatter is serving them more or less when they can actually hear their own voice? Is it more real versus just, a thought, which is so hard for me, honestly, to understand, because I'm just like, how do you not hear yourself?
Yeah. But and anyone who does experience verbal chatter of the sort that I write about has that reaction. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. So there are a couple of layers to this question. Let me try to peel them back. One question is, do we all have an inner voice? And this is a question that every couple of months or years, you see this debated on the internet and articles written. Do we all have an inner voice? Yes. If you have a mind that is well functioning, you have an inner voice. And what I mean by that is this. I define the inner voice as our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. Very basic capacity. Silently using a linguistic tool. Now, we can use language silently to do many different things. At the most basic end of the spectrum, if you go to the grocery store and you think to yourself, hey, what's on my grocery list? And then you go through it and just remind yourself, go like eggs, cheese, yogurt, put in your favorite kale.
And then that one thing that I'm notoriously going to forget because I can never remember the last thing, of course.
Yeah. And what is that last thing? You probably say those words in your head.
It's the one important thing my wife asked me to not forget.
Yes. I know that situation very well, my friend. So it can be a source of chatter later on. But that's you using your inner voice. Your inner voice is part of our verbal working memory system. This is a basic system of the human mind that we all rely on throughout the day. Repeat a phone number in your head. That's activating your inner voice. Now, we can also use the inner voice to do other things like coach ourselves during a difficult workout, or try to create a story, a narrative to explain our experiences. And there's more variability in the degree to which people engage in some of those other more complicated inner voice functions than the basic just keeping it, a nugget of information active in your head. So we rely on it to different degrees, and that there's variability across people. But we all do have this capacity. With respect to chatter, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is there are two primary modes through which we can think. We can think verbally or in terms of images. And most of what I talk about in chatter is the verbal mode, right? Like hearing those words and talking to ourselves. But some people see things, and sometimes the words and the images, go hand in hand. Like you may have had imagery of something that, I don't know, tell me one of your greatest fears if you're willing to share.
Okay. Pretty, wow. You wouldn't believe I'm a talker for a living. Pretty graphic. When I think imagery, comes up for me. I've gone through some pretty significant injuries in my time in the military. And for me now, if I'm pushing myself too hard in the gym, or I'm even thinking about pushing myself hard, I imagine my hips breaking again. I imagine the pins popping out of my femur, and that is, I guess, imagery chatter.
Yeah, there you go. And the imagery and the verbal can also go hand in hand. Okay. So they're not mutually exclusive. But I think as a basic, just distinction, thinking in words, thinking in images, and there's variability. There are individual differences in how much people experience chatter. In those
so chatter could be
modalities.
Verbal and nonverbal. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Interesting. Man, the brain, what a wild, crazy thing.
Wild, crazy thing that, is totally undiscovered. We keep learning, we're chipping away at it, but there is so much we don't know. It is, when I started doing brain research on these topics and others about 20 years ago, it was all about looking for spots in the brain, like, the amygdala, that's the seat of emotion, and amygdala goes up or goes, prefrontal, the front of the brain, prefrontal cortex up, the amygdala down. That's how you regulate your emotion. Looking back now, that was such an overly simplistic way of thinking about things. Now we're talking about networks in the brain and how different, groups of neurons within different areas speak to others. So it's really cool if you like this sort of stuff.
Oh, I love it.
Lot to discover.
Love it. I heard you mention language earlier, and I'm assuming you meant the language in which we are talking to ourselves. But what about when we shift language internally? For example, I speak another language. I speak Russian. So sometimes if I'm speaking to somebody, or I'm talking, thinking in Russian, I'll do the same in English.
Привет, is that?
Привет. Молодец, молодец.
Okay, you lost me. Sorry.
Привет. Hello. Yes. Goodbye. So what's happening there when we?
So I love
this
question. I love this question, Chase. And actually, I'm heartbroken over. I had a section of a chapter that didn't make it to the final version of the book on this topic.
So this is the uncut director's edition.
Yes, I'm teed up to talk about this. We haven't talked about. We didn't plan this. This wasn't planned. Yeah. So here's the cool thing about how second languages or third languages factor into all of this. Our native language, the first language we learn, this is the language in which we learn about emotions and we experience emotions, right? So if you've ever tried cursing in a second language compared to a first language, it doesn't quite have the same sting. Now, this is different for bilinguals, and you may be bilingual, so put you aside.
Чёрт возьми.
That's right.
Where are my Russian listeners out? You can translate that.
But if I've learned a few languages as clear second and third languages, I can have I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me cursing in those languages. It's kind of funny, like, I could say these potty words.
It's like it doesn't have the same meaning.
It doesn't have the same emotional punch.
Exactly.
Nelson Mandela actually had a great quote when he was trying to negotiate over apartheid, soon after, I believe, he was released from prison. he made it a point to learn the language of the opposition.
Wow.
Because if you learn the language of the opposition, then you can get right to the heart of the matter. I'm using that term purposefully. You can target their emotions. And so there's this linkage between our native language and our emotional experience. And what some research has shown, very cool work, is that if you ask people to think about emotionally evocative situations in a second language, that gives them more objectivity because it strips away some of the emotion.
Wow.
So that's another distancing tool that we possess. If you happen to speak a second or third language, try to work through your problem using that modality. That should give you some more distance.
What have you seen, besides maybe something else that didn't make the final cut of the book, but just the last, couple of years? And I know this kind of came out during the pandemic, but I'm curious, the last couple of years, has your understanding of chatter changed? Has your definition? Do you think we now as a human species are experiencing chatter in a different or unique way? Or are we revisiting a way maybe that we have suppressed or forgot about?
Well, I think we're living through the chatter event of the last 100 years. I think the hits just keep coming. Like when the pandemic first started, it was concomitant with a political election in this country that drew people apart and was creating major stress on both sides of the aisle. Those political issues persist. We now have an atrocious war in the Ukraine with Russia that is also further stoking the fire. And so, one thing I've seen is just an incredible need for understanding what these tools are. Now, I do think that it's clear that rates of chatter are up significantly since pre-pandemic times. There's been a lot of research that attests to that.
Mine's definitely been up. I've been talking to myself way more as a, first of all, kind of like what the hell is going on. I think a lot of people can relate, but now it's just like out of necessity, like I'm going to need to get me through this kind of thing.
Yeah. How are we going to process these things? We need to deal with, we're under perpetual uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen and we don't have control. Those are building blocks for chatter, uncertainty and a lack of control. So chatter's up, but we also see a lot of people being resilient, and we've been actually doing some research on this. And one of the things that we have found with this is unpublished work we're working on right now, but one of the things we've seen is that the more healthy strategies that people use, the lower their COVID anxiety. And so you asked me, what have we learned? What have I learned since the book came out? At the end of the book, I make a point that there's no one size fits all strategy. I talk about 26 different tools, and I would love to be able to answer the question that every single person asks. So what's the one thing you should do to manage your chatter? But my answer, I always feel a little bit like I'm a letdown, because I say, well, it depends on who you are and what the situation is. What we know is that there are lots of tools, and different tools or combinations work for different people in different situations. And that's what we see the data bearing out. It's the people who are using multiple tools, not one thing. Multiple. They're getting out. They're talking to their chatter advisors. They're traveling in time in a healthy way. They're activating. They're exercising. It's not one. It's many. The more healthy things you do, the better people seem to be feeling. So it really reinforces this idea that it's all about having a good toolbox. That is where the answer is, not just doing one thing.
So well said. And it's all about having a good toolbox. And everything you've been sharing now are great new tools in my toolbox and the listeners. But to kind of bring it all home, the ability for us to kind of be aware of what's going on in our mind and our lives, and then to better navigate that is what living a life ever forward is all about. That's the premise of the show. And I think what better place to start than the voice inside of our head. So I want to ask you, Ethan, what does that mean to you? When you hear those two words, ever forward, how do you live a life ever forward?
I live a life ever forward by recognizing that there's turbulence in life. It has always been that way, and it always will be. And I try to learn from that emotional weather, so to speak, and grow from it. And I try to have as much fun as possible while doing so. Um, so I don't get down on myself when I experience a blip of negativity, because I know that that's part of life. And actually, the small blips of negativity are usually doing something good for us, right? Like negative emotions in small doses are really helpful, but I don't try to bathe in them either. And that's been a pretty healthy formula for me for moving ever forward.
Not a bad formula at all. Thank you so much for your answer and your interpretation. We're going to have all of your information, the book, all listed down in the show notes and video notes for everybody. Really, really interesting read, just a different perspective on, there's so many great personal development, self-help books out there to understand the self, but this one hit home for me in a unique way because, the self, right? Who is it? What does he, she sound like? How can I understand it, interpret it, and just, sit with it in a better way? So thank you for your work.
Thanks for having me, Chase. This was a great deal of fun.